Thank you very much for that introduction. Thank you for being here. I want to start with the news, which is extraordinary. That quintuple reference jumps off the page. Past American presidents have tried for decades to get the Europeans to spend more on defense, and Trump finally pulled it off. Our friend Ed Luce at the FT, who many of you know, has a piece this morning in which he writes that Trump got NATO members to pledge something that they should have done years ago, which is to significantly lift their defense spending. At least on paper, Trump has succeeded where his predecessors failed. And I should say, by the way, that Ed's book, fantastic book, is available here on sale. Shameless pitch for Ed. You can buy it on Zabig. But I want to ask you, how much credit should President Trump get for this massive spike in European defense spending?
Well, first of all, good morning, and thanks a lot, really, for invitation to be present here in this, Aspen forum. Really, it's a big honor. And second, well, very direct question. I can say that perhaps we need to divide that, achievement of that Europeans started to spend much more money for defense in between of President Trump, but also President Putin. Because definitely
they share the credit in some ways. Yeah.
Oh, it's different credits, of course,
Yeah.
but nevertheless, we need to understand that first of all, with the war, Russian war against Ukraine, Europeans got very clear message that this permanent threat from authoritarian, aggressive Russia is becoming really a threat not only to the neighborhood countries, but also to the whole Europe. Second, starting from somewhere from the middle of last year, we started to get very clear messages from our intelligence services. For example, German one, Dutch one, and some others, which started to speak very loudly that Russia is preparing and will be ready to test Article 5 in Europe during next 3 or 5 years. And the numbers which we started to get, again, from our intelligence services, from experts, that, for example, Russia now is producing, during 3 months, such amount of ammunition, which, all the member states of NATO, including Europeans and Americans, were able to produce only during 1 year. That was a message which, put us into very clear, understanding what threats we're facing and that we need to do something much more than we were doing before.
So the cajoling of Trump and the threat of Putin simultaneously created a new sense of urgency in a lot of European capitals on defense.
That's precisely. I would add, in addition, that what we started to understand, I'm always repeating that, that from one side, really, we are facing clear threats from Russian side, and that is why we need to, ramp up our defense readiness. From another side, we understand very logically that American side has a lot of arguments to look more and more towards possible threats from rising Chinese military power,
right,
and to shift, maybe, in evolutionary way, yes, to shift more and more of their attention towards Indo-Pacific, and that means that we need to take care much more about European security on our own shoulders.
It's a striking reflection of the times we're in that in literally the same month that President Trump was at the NATO summit in Europe, he also, soon after, threatened a 30% tariff, as you know, on EU countries. Would it create challenges for European nations to spend more money on defense if they're having to spend so much money on tariffs to pay to the U.S.?
Of course, this, dispute on tariffs is not the best way for us, to look into our transatlantic relations. There are different arguments. I do not see such kind of problems which, maybe American side is raising. I hope still, that we are able to agree till August, the 1st of August. I know that the teams are working very, very heavily. But definitely, it's not only about the question about how much money we need to spend on our defense readiness and what we shall do if, that new tariffs policy will create some kind of economical problems. The question is also about political trust in between of each other, and some kind of credibility, because the threats which we are facing demand some kind of this, unity of our political understanding. And let's look how to build that, trust among ourselves, how to keep it.
President Trump has urged the Europeans to buy Patriot missiles from the U.S. At the same time, Europeans are, including in Brussels, are encouraging member states to buy Europe in terms of defense procurement. Does President Trump's urging, maybe even demanding that Ukraine buy Patriot missiles undercut that campaign of buy Europe in Brussels?
No, it's a little bit maybe, how to say, also more complicated, but also more simple issue.
Okay.
Because first of all, Patriots are the systems which, nobody else is producing some kind of set quality of the weapons, and Ukrainians need that. So it's good that, there is some kind of agreement in between of President Trump and NATO General Secretary and some leaders of European countries that now we shall really find the way how to supply to Ukraine those Patriot systems which are very much needed, because as we can see from what President Putin is doing, despite all President Trump efforts to have some kind of negotiations on peace agreement, President Putin is increasing attacks against Ukraine, against Kiev. So Patriots are very much needed. From another side, we need to see very clearly that we Europeans, if we want to take responsibility on our shoulders, we need to take care also about our defense industry. And because of that, really, we are creating European Union level programs. Now, we agreed last Wednesday in the Commission meeting, last meeting, on next MFF, we are increasing defense spending on EU level up to 130 billion euros for next 7 years budgetary period. But majority of money for defense in Europe will be spent by member states. And here is no regulation how member states will spend those money. We shall try to use European Union programs to incentivize member states to spend more of their money
in Europe.
Yeah. But the proportion is very simple. Yeah. During 7 years from 2028 till 2035, what is next MFF period, European Union, on European Union level, we shall have more or less 100 billion euros for defense. On national level, it will be around 4 trillion euros to be spent for defense. So majority of money will be not regulated at all.
And you want to see the bulk of that money spent in Europe on European defense contractors?
We are trying to convince member states really to take care about the European defense industry, but till now, around 40% of contracts, what member states were doing, were contracts with American defense industry.
Yeah. Let's talk about Russia for a few minutes. Obviously, in Washington, there's been a remarkable story the last 2 weeks in which President Trump has grown frustrated with what he perceives as Putin slow-walking him and avoiding a peace deal that Trump so eagerly wants. And Trump has taken a tougher tack toward Putin and has said directly to his Department of Defense, supply Ukraine with more defensive weapons. This is a very different posture that we've seen in the last 2 weeks. What's your sense? What can you tell us about this new approach from President Trump? Why do you think he's taken this new line on Russia?
Well, my guess is that he understood, that some kind of diplomacy with Putin, especially on such kind of question like peace in Ukraine, is not bringing any kind of results, which we knew before. We Europeans, we knew that before. Well, it took some time for President Trump, to understand also that logic. And the only way to bring peace, into Ukraine is really to implement this formula, peace through strength, which, as we understand also, President Trump is very much in favor. We are in favor also. What does it mean? It means that we need to give more strength to Ukraine. All the additional strengths to Ukraine can come only from our side, from Europeans and from Americans.
Yes.
Can we do that? In my view, yes. Because if you will look how much we were military supporting Ukraine till now, both sides, Americans around of 60 billion euros and we Europeans around 60 billion euros during 3 years. Per year it comes down to 20 billion euros, which means that our support to Ukraine from both sides was around of 0.1% of our GDP. 0.1%. We are ready to invest into our defense, national defense, 3.5 or even 5 as we can calculate according to NATO agreement. But for Ukraine, we're giving only 0.1%. So there is a possibility to bring additional strength to Ukraine, and that is what we need to do.
But we know that he had some adverse, shall we say, conversations with Putin on the phone that sort of turned him. And we also know that his wife, who herself is Eastern European by birth, was telling the president that he talks a good game on the phone and that he's bombing these civilians after he hangs up the phone. President Trump said that out loud, so we know that. She was a fairly effective lobbying force. But tell us who in Europe has Trump's ear. Is this Zelensky who's establishing a better relationship? Are there other heads of state in the EU who have effectively made the case to Trump about Ukraine? I know President Stubb in Finland, for example, has developed a good rapport on the golf course with President Trump. But who's talking to him? Who's making this case persuasively, do you think?
I don't see, well, I do not have very clear, picture. This is only, what we can read in the newspapers, in Politico itself, and so on, guessing that Friedrich Merz had, important conversation and continues to have conversations. Of course, Finnish President Alexander Stubb, British Prime Minister Starmer, also is active. So there are, names and names which, we can name that we're trying to convince President Trump administration that, Putin is not going to have, he has no interest in peace.
Yes.
And the only way is to support Ukraine in order to avoid such an outcome, which can be very painful for the whole West. If the West will show that we are not strong enough to assist Ukraine in order to defend itself against Russian aggression, so China, I think, is watching very much,
yes.
And China will make a very simple conclusion. The West is weak. So we cannot allow to, the situation to develop in such a way.
If Ukraine falls, that emboldens the Chinese, you think, in the Pacific?
I think so. I can guess just, but I know that definitely, Chinese are watching.
Yeah. You're a former head of state in the Baltics. There's a sort of common currency here in America that certainly among folks who are more internationalist, more hawkish, that if Ukraine does fall, that Putin would try to move into other parts of Eastern Europe, including the Baltics. Is that your view too, that if Zelensky falls, if Ukraine falls to Putin and the Russians, that he would then try to make an incursion into the Baltic states?
Definitely, our weakness always is encouraging Putin. That's what we know from previous times. Even.
But would he invade the Baltics, do you think?
So when we hear from intelligence services, for example, of Germany, head of intelligence service, publicly announced that they have evidence that Putin is preparing, or they are discussing in Kremlin, some plans to test Article 5, the question is then very simple. If that is, really such a perspective, so where he will, test? Of course, in the neighboring countries which are members of NATO. So which countries are in the neighborhood and members of NATO? It's very simple, Baltic states, Finland, and so on. I cannot, say that, well, that he will go definitely to Estonia or to Lithuania, but that, threat feeling is here in our countries. That is why we're increasing our defense spending. We are building up our capabilities. We're happy that, NATO is taking care also. We have, for example, German brigade in Lithuania, other brigades from different countries in other Baltic states. So we are preparing, but, we need also to understand very clearly one additional issue. Now, on the European continent, there are two military forces, battle-tested forces, with the ability to use millions of drones. Ukrainians are saying that Russians are in drone warfare as good as Ukrainians. Ukrainians are ready to use this year 4 million drones and to produce them. It means that Russians are going to produce similar amount or even more. And if day X will come, we shall face aggression of a Russian battle-tested army, which is stronger than it was back in 2022. Another army on the European continent, which is also battle-tested, is Ukrainian army. So the question is how we can, as quickly as possible, to look for some kind of arrangement to strengthen our defense capabilities, integrating Ukrainian, both their military forces and their very powerful military industry into European networks.
In speaking with the Ukrainians, do you feel confident that President Zelensky has repaired his relationship with President Trump?
Well, I can just, make my conclusions from reading POLITICO or some other,
You talk to the government in Kyiv, though. You're the defense commissioner of the EU.
No, definitely, we see that more positive, development. And really, the recent conversations perhaps were quite important. And, well, I hope that also President Trump started to understand better President Zelensky, who made such kind of impact. Again, we can guess how much Europeans, how much Zelensky. Now recently I have read an article about influence of Foreign Secretary Rubio, and so on. So it's good that such development is happening.
The other part of your title, beyond being the Commissioner for Defense, is the Commissioner for Space. And I want to ask you about the spending that you're overseeing going forward. The Commission has a budget, I think, of $131 billion for defense and space. How much of that do you see going for defense? How much of that do you see going for space?
Well, that is what we shall discuss among ourselves. It's good,
Tell us here first if you want.
It's good increase in general, for defense and space, because till now, in the budget of today, we have 26 billion. So it's 5 times, more in the next budget. I hope that, member states more or less will agree on that, because still we have two years of negotiations on that budget. And, well, what we see really that in space, first of all, we have quite good developments with European systems like Galileo for positioning or Copernicus for Earth observation. Now we are building IRIS² for satellite secure communication, and somebody saying that it will be better than Starlink. I hope so. And also we see how much we need to develop new systems, especially for intelligence data, for our defense and security people, and that will demand money. So I will not tell you precisely how that division will be done in between of defense and space, but definitely space budget also will increase quite substantially.
I think we have time for one question here. If anybody wants to grab the mic and ask about Ukraine or European defense spending or anything else. Yes, sir. Right here in the middle. We can sneak in 2 if we're fast. Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Alexander Yui, Taiwan's representative to the United States. I was based in Brussels before. So, hello, Commissioner. I have a question on China, People's Republic of China. You mentioned China's issue, and Secretary General Rutte from NATO mentioned not long ago that Russia will help China invade Taiwan by distracting Europe. And I think that's China's already trying to do that by helping Russia continue the war in Ukraine, by supporting Russia by way of economically, financially, even helping them have their military production in full capacity. So my question is EU engaging with the Chinese on this matters? Because it's a war of attrition, and for China to, I think China would like this war to continue as long as possible because it weakens Russia and weakens the West. Thank you.
Well, I can just share my recent discussion with famous General Zaluzhny, who was the first commander of Ukrainian army when Russians invaded back in 2022. Now he is ambassador in London, but he has quite interesting and important overviews of how the war is going on and who is learning, who is still not learning. And in his view, China really is among those who are very much learning from this war, and they want that war to go on, in between of Russia and Ukraine. Russians are learning a lot also. They improved their capabilities. We Europeans are still, not so much, moving ahead with that learning process. So, what China is planning to do, for me, it's, it's not my, responsibility, but definitely we need to understand that, our developments and our ability to defend Ukraine can very much influence what China will decide to do, towards Taiwan. So this is very much interconnected.
You believe China is more likely to invade Taiwan if the West walks away from Ukraine?
Well, it's, I can just guess that, all those threats and building up of military capabilities of China, and knowing, their demands that, Taiwan should be part of China, I'm worried about, that the whole development can go into real military conflict. So let's do everything in order really to show that such kind of conflicts will not bring any kind of benefit for whatever country, either for Russia or for China.
We'll end on that. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks all of you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.